So it's my great honor to introduce our speaker here. And what I need to tell you about this person is that he came to the United States when he was 9 years old. And he represents the great city of New York. Do we have any New York City people here? Congressman, and I'm going to do my best to say his name correctly, but my Spanish isn't that great. But Congressman Adriano Espaillat is the first Dominican Republican American member to be elected to the U.S. Congress.
Build bridges, not walls, huh? Well, welcome to Washington. I hear that lately this is sort of like a roller coaster ride. It's up and down, you know. If you sit in the front seat of the roller coaster and you let go, you get this rush, this feeling, right? So you get that every week here. But this is an important week. I had notes, but I'm not going to use them. This is an important week because once again this week we will have to pass, or we're expected to pass, a spending bill, an omnibus bill. First of all, how many of you are from New York? All right, New York. You're welcome. So this bill proposes to give out money for different projects. For example, for New York, right, we have a very important tunnel that we want to build, the Gateway Tunnel, which connects New York and New Jersey. And there is a very fragile rail system in the Northeast coast. If one track goes bad, it sort of like paralyzes the entire Northeast coast. Very few people know that. And so we need to strengthen that rail system, not only to carry passengers, freight, the likes, but it's an important part of our infrastructure, our transportation system. And so we need to build this tunnel that will sort of like ease the traffic there in that Northeast corridor. But it costs a lot of money. Everything costs money, right? And we want that money's in the budget, in this omnibus bill that we're going to pass sometime this week. And the president, for whatever reason, he's a New Yorker, he should be supportive of it, right? But guess what? He's not. But in addition to that, there are other spending matters that will be in that budget, and very often, right, they include language in it that will not necessarily be a budget-related, money-related issue, but it will be a policy issue, a public policy issue. So we are expecting that there will be an effort to include some of the immigration reform stuff in there. And the Republican majority has floated a proposal called 3 for 3. That's not a batting average either, right? 3 for 3, which means a 3-year extension of DACA and 3 years of funding for a wall. But it doesn't resolve the DACA issue permanently. So that's a non-starter, right? And as we look back, right, we have continuing resolutions, which meant there were efforts to fund government for an additional 2 to 3 weeks. We had several of those. And those were crossroads where we felt that the DACA issue, the Dreamers issue, will be addressed. But it wasn't addressed. And then we had another big budget agreement where a bunch of things were agreed on. CHIP, right, the insurance for children was extended for 10 years, a good thing, right? Yeah. Community health clinics, right? Federally funded community health clinics were included there, another good thing. Disaster relief for Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, Houston, Texas, the fires in California and Florida, very good thing, right? And so all these funding to combat opiated drugs across America, which is a huge epidemic across America. Urban cities like New York have had heroin since the 60s. But now America has awakened to see how damaging this drug is. And it's become a national crisis, but it's been in my district in Harlem since the 1960s, or before that. There was funding for that as well. But again, once again, dreamers and DACA recipients were left out. So, in essence, they have become sort of like hostages, right? They become hostages in the political game, in the fight, to see who gets what. And so it's important that as you descend on Washington today, you understand that these dreamers, that once you meet them, right, you can't say no to them, because they are teachers, they are doctors, they are members of our armed forces, they are workers, they're caretakers. They're probably America's best economic development plan in the country. A vibrant force. I got 2,700 of them in my district and another 5,000 eligible ones. Vibrant. They provide monies for the economy. They pay taxes. And yet, and many of them don't speak the language of the nation they were born in. Many of them don't have families back there, or even a remote connection with the place that they were born, but yet we want to send them back. And then we say, well, you know, it's not their fault. They were born here by the parents, almost like criminalizing their parents. Their parents were just like my parents, try to do the best they could for me. And so you can't criminalize a parent for trying to save their children's life or opening up the doors of the future for their children. That's expected of every parent. And so you're going to hear some of the hostage takers, the kidnappers that are holding these young people hostage. You're going to hear their language will say, well, we got to end chain migration. My grandmother was here before I was born, and she petitioned for us. She saw that as bringing the family together. There was nothing chain about that. It was about bringing our family together. It was about family values, about making our family stronger, right? And they're going to say things like, we got to build a wall. Members from the same party that saw a former Republican leader said, Gorbachev, bring down that wall. Decades later now are going to be asking to erect the wall as though people cannot climb a wall or dig a tunnel under a wall and get in anyway. Okay? So you're going to hear things of that nature. You're going to hear them say, the kidnappers, the one that hold these folks hostages, 800,000 of them, almost 1 million of them, and their parents, they could come in. The dreamers could come in. But we can't guarantee anything for their parents. In fact, we want you to fund 20,000 additional ICE agents. What you're saying, in essence, is that these young people could stay, but you're going to proceed to deport their parents. The same people that brag about family values, they want to split families apart. And so this is the language that you will confront. They're going to say, well, we need bipartisanship because America is tired, sick and tired of Republican this, Democratic that. America wants everybody to work together. Well, there are 3 pieces of legislation. The DREAM Act, the Clean Dream Act, which is sponsored by Ileana Ross-Lehtner, a Republican from Florida, and Lucille Roy-Allard, a Democrat from California. And it has 200 co-sponsors, including myself. Then you have the Hurd-Aguilar bill. Hurd, a Republican from Texas. Aguilar, a Democrat. And that one not only addresses the DREAM Act, but it also puts in money for wall or border security, for ports of entry. I agree that we should have stronger ports of entry. It is through these ports of entry, both in the northern border and in the southern border, that drugs come in, that illegal weapons come in, that human trafficking come in. So making them strong, state-of-the-art, new border port of entries is a good thing. We're not saying that's bad, but that's also a bipartisan bill. The Senate, 3 Democratic senators and 3 Republican senators put a framework for this issue where they put a resolution for the Dreamers, a temporary resolution for their parents saying they could stay here for 3 years. They could even travel back home if they like. And also some border security funding there. But that's not enough, because they have these kids as hostages, and hostages usually, when you give them what they want more. It's never enough. And so this is what you're going to face here as you descend in Washington today, and this very important week, where we will be making again a budget decision, a decision to fund an omnibus bill, where I hope the DREAM Act will be taken on its own merit, alone, without no baggage, without no attachment, just on its own, clean, transparent, meritorious. That's what we need. So I thank you for being here. And the Dreamers, the message that I send to them is not to be afraid. They've come out of the shadows. They're very powerful. They found their own voice. And in essence, they have changed America. 80%, over 80% of Americans across the country, in red states and in blue states, in Republican districts and in Democratic districts, even 70% of Trump followers feel that the Dreamers should stay. No other immigration issue in the history of our nation has gathered more support, broad support across the country than this issue of the Dreamers. And that's because they came forward unafraid. They gave a face to the movement and a voice to those that could not speak. And we identify, because we are all in a certain way, we are all dreamers. Whether you were born here or not, you all dream to aspire for something. We're all dreamers deep in our hearts, and we identify with them. So I tell them, and if you see them, tell them not to be afraid, not to be deterred, not to be discouraged, not to dismay, that we will not turn our backs on them, even in these very difficult times. When we saw the massacre in Parkland, and everyone was shaken by it, and our attention, of course, has to go there as well. We must not leave them behind. Even when we felt that we were compelled to help the people in Puerto Rico, which 6 months ago, and still today, many of them don't have energy or a roof over their head. We were compelled to help them. We did not leave them behind. And today, you should tell them that we will not leave them behind. That you are here to speak for them, to support them, that in fact they are us. Because in essence, deep inside of us, we are all dreamers. Thank you so much, and keep the faith.
The congressman has generously agreed to take some questions, and I want to invite dreamers, if we have dreamers that are with us right now, to ask the first questions, to open it up. We will eventually open it up to everyone, but given that rousing encouragement from the congressman, I'd like to just ask if there is anyone who would like to start questions off.
One question. Any question?
We can take questions from others as well. Yes, right here in the scarf, the white. So, could you introduce yourself too? Just say your name and where you're from.
My name is Daniela Espaillat, and I'm from Maryland. And so my question to you is, so I've heard this I don't really know if it's a proposed bill or anything, but I've heard something along the lines of putting more like border patrol along like the all of the border, like so the coast, on like the border between Canada and us and Mexico. So putting more border patrol within like 100-mile radius of the borders, like I've heard of something like that. I wanted to know if you could clarify.
Well, you're going to hear a bunch of proposals because what happened in essence was that when we could not agree on DACA or the Dreamers, the Senate opened up a discussion, a debate, and allowed all the proposals to be heard, right? And there you had very extremist proposals from both ends, right? And so it's difficult when in a discussion, right, to bring consensus. You have to have flexibility to bring consensus. When you bring the radical voices in there, it's very difficult to have an agreement. It's almost as though we would have a discussion about climate change. And then we bring someone to the table and give that person a prominent seat at the table that believes that climate change is a hoax. It's very difficult now to build a consensus because that person will be there to derail any potential consensus building effort. And so the Border Patrol discussion has been there all along. In fact, it is in two of the proposals, the bipartisan proposals that I talked to you about. They talk about a wall. They even talk about non-traditional walls. They talk about drones. They talk about infrared equipment. They talk about strengthening the ports of entry, the infrastructure around the road, right? Roads and bridges around the wall. There's a wall already that exists in several places in the southern border. And increasing, of course, ICE agents and Border Patrol. And so that's part of one proposal, or many proposals, just as some of them that have that in them. But I think that the DREAM Act, our discussion, should come first with a clean discussion about the DREAM Act, and then we can talk about comprehensive immigration reform. If you saddle the DREAM discussion with other aspects of comprehensive immigration reform, for example, TPS, temporary protected status for people from El Salvador, Haiti, Sub-Saharan Africa, countries that have witnessed terrible natural disasters or war, and they've been here, over 500,000 of them in total, with a temporary protected status. All of a sudden they lose that status, and now they get caught in the bargaining, as a bargaining chip in this whole discussion. And they say, well, we have diversity visas that we want to eliminate, but maybe we just keep 25,000 of the 50,000 diversity visas, and then those 25,000 we give them to those people that lost their temporary protected status, their TPS, and bring them in 25,000 at a time. So yes, you're going to hear about a bunch of things, including funding for Border Patrol. I have two bills that calls on Border Patrol agents and ICE agents to wear a body camera, so that when they interact with people, everything is recorded and your civil rights are protected, but they're also protected themselves from anybody coming up with an unwarranted claim, a false claim against them. I also have a bill that protects sensitive locations. I don't think ICE agents should be going into churches, funeral homes, schools, emergency rooms to interrogate, cuff, arrest, and deport people. So you're gonna hear all these issues, including funding for additional Border Patrol agents. That's part of the broader discussion that unfortunately makes it very difficult to then reach an agreement on this very simple thing, which is, should somebody that's been here since they were a baby, wakes up every morning feeling as though they are Americans, never felt any way different, maybe only speaks English, should they have the right to stay here in the United States of America? That's a very simple concept, right? But it's often loaded with other parts of immigration reform that makes it very difficult for us to tackle.
Thank you. Other questions? How about in the back there? Let's take a couple of questions, actually. Could we also go over here, Susan, to the person, about the fifth row back. We'll take 2 questions, and then, is that okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Antonio, and I'm from the Florida delegation. I first off want to thank you for being in Congress. It gives me pride when I see other Hispanics in Congress, so I have to thank you for that. But my question is, so I come from Miami, and there's some Republicans that are Hispanic, and they are in support of Dreamers, but they will sometimes be more, aggressive in terms of protecting our border and kind of militarizing ICE. So how do you approach kind of convincing them that these aren't necessary and we can have national security without tearing immigrant families?
Well, you have 2 members of the Florida delegation that are Republican. As I mentioned, Ileana Ross-Lettner, who's retiring this year, who's the prime sponsor, co-sponsor of the Clean Dream Act. Congressman Curvello, who's also a Republican, also has another version of the Dream Act, which is somewhat attractive that I could live with. So you have 2 Republicans there, and as I said before, 80% of the American people support that. So when people go back home, when these representatives go back home, they're running into their constituencies that support Dreamers. The problem is that the leadership of the Republican Party doesn't want to allow the Dream Act to hit the floor. If the Dream Act was to hit the floor today, I think it will pass with great numbers because it has public support. The young people, the Dreamers, have impacted positively the public sentiment, right? As Abraham Lincoln used to say, the importance of the public sentiment. So the debate about security is somewhat a parallel debate that's always there, but this is a very technical discussion as well. Do you allow the bill to hit the floor? I think if you do, it passes. I think the public wants it to pass. Ironically enough, when we had that budget crossroad several weeks back, the public said, we support Dreamers. But if the Dreamers are the reason why government has to shut down, then we don't think that should happen. They began to lose support when the question was framed that way. But on its face, Dreamers are supported by the vast part of America, so you really don't have to saddle that bill, that legislative proposal, with other items that are going to make it more difficult, like funding ICE and Border Patrol. The bill should hit the floor, and I think it has the numbers on both sides of the aisle to pass, as it does in the Senate as well.
Great. We have a mic over here.
My name is Yaritza. I'm undocumented and afraid. I come from New Jersey, a small community. And what will you tell somebody who's afraid to tell their story?
Well, this is very personal, right? For everybody. And so I cannot put myself in the shoes of any individual because some people may feel that they can come forward. Other people want to be a bit more cautious. And it also depends where you reside, where you live, right? What is the environment there? Are the police deputized to have federal law enforcement powers, as they've done in some cities and some municipalities across the country? So, I cannot really put myself in those shoes, but what I would tell you is that I find that the Dreamers that have come forward have liberated themselves and they have empowered themselves. And I could feel it when I meet them and I shake their hands. And they have been a strong force. I tell them, when you write history, you don't even know you're doing it. It is maybe 10 or 15 years later that people say, wow, those young people back 3 decades ago, they were the freedom fighters of that decade. They were similar to those folks that went down to the South to register people to vote and even put their lives on the line, and some of them got killed. They brought the arc of moral justice further to the right side of history. And they wrote history themselves. So it's a very powerful moment. And you should embrace that moment. And you handle it in the best way that you can. It doesn't necessarily have to be marching with somebody. You can contribute in many ways. You could make phone calls, you could write letters, you could engage in social media. You could do a bunch of things to change people's minds. It doesn't have to be the traditional marching in the streets as it has happened today. But you can contribute in many ways. And I find that those that are engaged in the process are empowered, and you can feel it in their handshake and see it in their faces.
Thank you. What an encouraging comment about the wide support for a Clean Dream Act. I think it's really important that we all remember that when you go in, that there's a lot of people who support this. Jordan, do you still have a question? You had your hand up. Wait for a mic, please.
I guess I wanted to make a comment to the first person who spoke to say that I live in the southernmost part of Texas, the Rio Grande Valley. There is a heavy Border Patrol presence, and you cannot actually find a route out of the RGV without going through Border Patrol checkpoints. And growing up there can be really suffocating and traumatizing, especially to people who have never experienced anything else. Also, I wanted just to say that the DR is a beautiful country. My great uncle was Raul Izaguirre, former ambassador there.
Of course, yes. I met him while he was there.
Oh, yes, absolutely. He's a great person. We wish him well in his health. But what I wanted to ask was, the Dreamer question is often phrased in terms of the economic value that Dreamers bring to Americans. And I was wondering what you'd recommend for those of us who want to shift it less for what Dreamers and undocumented Americans contribute, and more for the fact that we need to be more empathetic to our fellow humans.
Well, I believe that to be very much the case. I think that we have, as a country, and if you see where many of those young people are coming from, for many years we turned our heads away from our neighbors and we began to focus, not to say that it wasn't justifiable, but we began to focus on other regions of the world. But we have allowed ourselves to drift a little bit from our neighbors in Central, South America, and the Caribbean. And as a result, we have created, I believe, a vacuum of leadership there. And because there's a vacuum of leadership, there's instability in many, and unemployment and economic hardship in many parts of that region that then push this to happen. And so the empathy that we should have, really, we have it when we engage those communities on a regular basis. When you see folks and you engage with them, that's when you have empathy for them. If they are anonymous and we do not engage them, we lose our empathy for them, and we fail to recognize the value that they have, the values that they carry also. And so I think we must re-engage that region of the world in a positive way and re-engage those economies and begin to fill the vacuum of leadership that we have abdicated perhaps to other forces that are not as welcoming to them but may have engaged them in a very transactional way economically and have reaped the benefits of that transaction and now have gained some leadership in those countries. I think that we have very much failed that region of the world, and we should go back and fix that. Yes.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Is there someone in the room who has not had a chance to ask a question at all? All right, yes, with the maroon color, please, here in the middle. Please introduce yourself.
Buenas tardes. My name is Emma Shalot Barron, and I'm from Dallas, Texas. I had a question about messaging. So you mentioned the word hostage, and I think that's kind of a revelation because we've been hearing of dreamers like myself being used as pawns, being in limbo. But when we use the word hostage, it signifies that we did not consent to this to being in this discussion in this way. So what are messages that we could take back to our communities and share with our fellow peers who want to get involved in this type of work that would be effective so that our representatives hear us?
I don't know if everybody would like the hostage word, but I use it because I'm comfortable with it. But I understand that it could be unnerving to some folks, and you don't want that. You want a free flow of ideas and discussions that will lead to a solution, right? But look, messaging is important, and consistency in the messaging is important. And I think up until today, the Dreamers and this movement has done a tremendous job at messaging, and that's why 80% plus, I saw a poll that said 84% of Americans support Dreamers, because I think the message has been very straightforward, very refreshing, like a breath of fresh air. Unafraid. It's been very authentic, right? And I think that has captured the hearts and minds of American people. So I think follow the messaging that you've engaged in right now. Don't sidetrack yourself or detour from that, because I think it's working. Unfortunately, the effort has been caught up in a cobweb of politics, a very mechanical politics. When I said earlier, the bill is not allowed to reach the floor. It's as simple as that. If they put it today on the floor, I tell you that it will pass with great numbers. And it will sail right through the Senate. He may veto it in the White House, but it will pass Congress. And so I think that your messaging has been tremendous, very positive. Everybody has identified with it, and you must continue down that road. Thank you so much. God bless you.
Thank you so much for your time.